In this video, we relate 7 horror stories that are real accounts from real people. We can never be sure if ghosts exist, but as we hear their stories, we do believe that some people are more susceptible to the supernatural than others, and that ghosts do exist. A pretty Chinese girl. This happened a few years ago when my buddy and I visited Taiwan. We both were single at that time and we were drinking almost every night. On the second night, we were both extremely drunk, to a state of too drunk to do anything. We staggered back to our hotel room. When we reached our floor, we saw this really pretty Chinese girl waving to us from the other side of the lift landing. As I mentioned, we were too drunk to do anything. We did not approach her but simply smiled and continued staggering back to our room. We were totally flat out that night. The next afternoon, we met this very friendly young guy at the reception. As he was alone, being guys, we asked him if he knew of a very pretty girl staying on our level. He explained that as it is a small hotel and not a busy season, the hotel was hardly occupied. Then he looked around conspicuously. Okay, nobody else except the 3 of us. Then he took out a newspaper article, lowered his volume and said, "I will lose my job if I say this, please keep it a secret. A young and pretty girl was murdered in our hotel a few months back in a room on your level. Police is still investigating and the murderer is at large." With that, he flipped the newspaper over and the picture of the pretty girl from last night, staring right at us. Haunted toilet. Being an army officer, we are all supposed to be brave and strong. The stuff about ghosts is brushed off as childish and sissy. But sometimes even the strongest man can be fearful. This happened very recently when I was in the military base. Rather late one night, I went to the toilet which was located at the end of the building. I met another officer while inside. The urinals are at the front of the toilet while the cubicles are towards the back, after the basins. We both chatted while relieving ourselves at the urinals. There was no one else in the toilet except for the 2 of us, and all the cubicle doors were either slightly ajar or fully opened, just like how a normal toilet would look like. Then suddenly, we heard the sound of scrubbing and washing. It sounded more like someone washing clothes rather vigorously, and not the sound of washing toilets. Discipline is strict in the military. It is ridiculous to be washing clothes in the middle of the night. As I mentioned, we are expected to be brave, and with another officer there, all the more I cannot be a wimp. So we both walked and checked every cubicle, all 12 of them. You can imagine how grueling that was, pushing 12 doors, one by one. The sound of washing continued. As we reached the 3rd last cubicle, the washing sound suddenly stopped and everything went dead quiet. We looked at each other and quickly pushed open the last 2 doors and just wanted to get the hell out. True enough, there was nothing in all 12 cubicles. We both continued our cool act and walked to our respective rooms like nothing had happened, and neither of us talked about it after that night. The smiling lady. This happened over 40 years ago when my mom was still a young lady of around 25. She rented a place that was part of a huge estate. They were not exactly bedrooms nor individual apartments. It was an enormous house that the owners cut up and rent out the different parts of the house to different tenants. Some were studio units while some were 2 bedrooms. My mum rented the studio ones, which were situated at the end of the big plot of land. The estate had a weird warning to tenants to come home early. Not exactly a rule, but a friendly warning, giving the excuse that as the estate was huge, it's for the safety of the residents to be home early. Going back to her place, she had to walk past this segment of the house which was not occupied by anyone, as told by her landlord. This segment had a window which was on the ground level. The curtains were always drawn close whenever she passed the window during the day. As her work was a regular job, she normally went home not later than 7 p.m., which still had some light. After staying for a week or so, She went out with friends during the weekend, and came back late, past midnight. As she was walking past this particular segment, she saw a lady in her 50s, waving slowly, and smiling at her from that window. My mom's first thoughts were, "That's weird, I thought no one's staying here?" Nonetheless, my mom smiled and waved back. The next night, she came back around 10 p.m. The whole area was terrifyingly quiet, not even the sound of cricket was heard. As she was walking past the same segment, the same lady was there, giving her the same friendly smile, and the same slow wave. The same thoughts ran through my mom's head, and she did the same thing as the previous night, to smile and wave back. The next morning, she met her landlord, who was staying at the main building of the estate. He was tending to his garden. My mom then asked her landlord about the lady in that segment of the house. He dropped the scissors he was holding, and turned to face my mom. With a dead serious look on his face, he warned my mom, "Come home early. It is part of the estate's rules." He then walked away, not saying anything else. My mom was kind of unhappy that he just walked away, but his body language made my mom more uncomfortable than unhappy. After the conversation, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She walked towards that segment of the house. She wanted to say hi to whoever was staying there. She was too curious why a lady would be looking out a window that had no views, 2 nights in a row. She went towards the door, and to her horror, the door was chained up from the outside, and there were cobwebs on the door, on the chain, and around the window where she saw the smiling lady. The curtains were drawn shut. She moved out that very day. The sofa. This is not a ghost story. This is a sad but true story that happened to 2 of my friends. 2 healthy and big-built guys, who were born in the same year, and both were only 32 when they died. What made it worse, their deaths happened within 1 year from the other, which I believe resulted from the same sofa. We rented a 1-bedroom place in the Midwest, and the apartment came fully furnished with some really old, but decent-looking furniture. The building itself was probably more than 100 years old. There was this sofa in the living area. A really old but comfortable sofa. Though comfortable, however, I don't find myself liking to sit there too much. I don't know why. My ex-girlfriend who rented the apartment with me, had a brother who came from a couple of states away, and looking for a job in the Midwest. He had no place to stay and very little money. So we offered him our apartment, but the only place he could sleep in was the sofa, which he happily accepted. A decent 32-year-old guy with no history of drugs, just looking for a new lease of life after divorce. After staying for 3 nights, he developed severe ear infection. The infection was so bad, that within 2 days, he went into a coma. 2 days before, we were still having dinner, joking happily together. 2 days later, he was seriously hooked up with tubes in the ICU, and in a coma. A healthy big-built 32-year-old. On the 3rd day, he died. Just like that. Less than a year later, a close friend of ours, who fell out with his parents, stayed over at our place and slept on the same couch. He slept there for 3 nights. In the afternoon on the 4th day, we saw him still sleeping, and it was already past noon. We went to wake him. We shook him. He did not move. We then felt his breathing, there was none. He could not, and did not wake up. The cause of death was certified as heart attack. A healthy and similarly big-built 32-year-old, with no known history of drug abuse. Gone. Just like that, again. I am not living there anymore. It's been more than 15 years now. I still cannot understand the logic. Is there even logic? Mere coincidence? The third alighting passenger. We went to a friend's funeral about 23 years ago. We were not that close to the deceased, so we chose to wait outside for another 2 friends, before going in together. My friend who was with me, let's name her Lily, was getting impatient, as we had been waiting for more than 15 minutes. At that time, not everyone carried a cell phone. We then saw a taxi approaching and then stopped a distance in front of us. Our two friends had finally arrived, and they started to alight from the taxi. Guy friend A alighted, followed by guy friend B. Then followed by a fair-looking lady with long hair, and dressed in a white dress. There was some distance, so we couldn't see her clearly. Lily, who was still impatient from waiting, then said sharply, "Why is he even bringing an unknown woman to a funeral?" As both our friends started walking over and were apologizing for being late, we got indulged in talking among the four of us. Then suddenly, Lily remembered the lady, and we both realized she was not with us. Lily asked, "Hey, who is the lady who came with you in the taxi, and where is she now?" Both guy friends, A and B, looked at Lily with big eyes and asked, "What lady?" There were only two of us in the taxi. Lily and I looked at each other. We were both absolutely sure there was a lady, the third passenger, who disappeared after alighting. Who is that lady? The place that I lived in during my childhood was an old apartment block that's around 50 years of age. We were very poor, and the place was so small that from the main door of our apartment, you could see right through the small living area and directly into the kitchen at the back, all in less than under, probably 20 feet, or 7 meters. My mom is a single mother, and we lived with my grandmother. At that time, my grandmother was not that old, probably around 50, and I was around 10. One morning, my mother's friend, first time coming to our place, and she had not met my grandmother before, to pass something to my mom. My grandmother had gone to the market, so she was not home. My mom's friend was standing at the main door, talking to my mom, and I was in the living area. Then suddenly, my mom's friend started waving to someone in the kitchen, then she smiled and said hello. My mother and I both turned towards the kitchen, and she asked her friend who did she say hi to. My mom's friend then said, "There. To your mom, sitting at the back, smiling sweetly at me now." We both turned towards the kitchen again. There was no one there. Haunted Hotel. This happened to my good buddy and his wife in 2015. They went to Thailand for 2 nights as part of their Asia holiday route. They stayed on level 4 in an old, low-rise hotel. Their room was in the middle of a long corridor that was well lit with wall lamps. Everything looked old but pleasant. As it was only a 2-night trip, their daytime was pretty well packed. On the first night, they went back to the hotel just past midnight. The corridor looked pretty dark as most of the wall lamps were not working, which was weird, because they were still working fine when they checked in. Then suddenly, while walking towards their room, along the darkish corridor, my friend's wife suddenly grabbed his arm and walked rather closely next to him. After opening the door to their room, my friend turned back, and saw his wife staring towards the end of the dark corridor with her face turning pale. My friend also turned and looked in the same direction, and asked her what was she staring at. She just said nothing, and went straight into the room. My buddy suspected something was wrong, as his wife is always pretty cool and level-headed, definitely not the panicky type. The night went on peacefully. The next morning, when they were ready to go out again, his wife, upon exiting from their room, suddenly walked all the way to the end of the long corridor by herself. My buddy followed his wife. One thing that needs mentioning at this point is, the wall lamps along the corridor are all now working well, so the corridor is bright again. Following his wife to the end of the corridor, they found themselves looking at a pretty long stretch of solid wall on the left side that's around 30 feet long. At this point, my friend saw the pale look on his wife's face again. He asked her what's wrong. And again, she said, "Nothing, let's go." They continued their last full day with shopping and eating, going back to the hotel around midnight again. When they reached level 4, they saw that the corridor was darkish again. Just like the previous night, the wall lamps were mostly not working, which was again very weird because they were all working perfectly well just 12 hours ago. Then suddenly, my buddy's wife grabbed his arm again, this time tighter than the previous night. She then walked extremely close behind him, and stuffed her head, hiding behind his shoulder, literally not looking forward and depending on my friend to walk. Seeing her reaction, he knew for sure that she saw something. My friend stared hard at the end of the corridor, but he saw nothing. The moment their room door was opened, my friend's wife went straight to bed and covered herself under the blanket, completely from head to toe. He asked her if she was alright, and her reply was to just let her sleep, and she will tell him when they leave Thailand. My friend then went for a shower, and when he got back to bed, he kissed her and found that she was running a fever. But as she was sleeping so soundly, he did not want to disturb her. The next morning, they packed their stuff and left their room, with the wife still looking weak and still feverish. They went past the corridor and as expected, all the wall lamps were working again so the corridor was bright. They checked out of the hotel and made their way to the airport. Miraculously, when they reached the airport, her fever was gone and she was her usual energetic self again. When they were on the flight to the next leg of their Asia holiday, my buddy was unable to contain his curiosity any further. Seeing that his wife was normal and energetic again, he asked her what happened. She then told him everything. The first night, she saw an old lady in white, pushing the housekeeping trolley towards the end of the corridor. Upon reaching the end, the old lady turned left and disappeared. She then assumed that the old lady went into a room at the end. She didn't think much of it but just felt very uncomfortable. That was why, the next morning, she went to investigate by walking to the end of the corridor. To her horror, she found the long stretch of solid wall, with no rooms for the entire length of around 30 feet. The old lady had walked right into the wall. The second night, she saw the same old lady in the same clothes, standing at the same end of the corridor. This time, the old lady was staring right at them with a wicked grin. The braveness in my buddy's wife was gone, she decided to hide behind her husband. We have come to the end of this episode and thank you for watching. It is our first attempt at horror stories and we hope you like them. Please grow with us by hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell for new videos. Drop us a like if you could.